Hi, I am just logging in a few minutes early. I really have no way of knowing who's going to be here. So, hi, I'm Diana Rachel. I am the author behind the Spirited Witch Substack and the author of the books Urban Magic and Hex Twisting Counter Magic Spells for the Irritated Witch. So, for folks that are logging in here, welcome. Hi. It does look like you can ask questions because I'm going to have to bounce between my phone and my laptop. I may miss them, so I will circle back to you questions at the end of the class. Ask them while you have them. So a few housekeeping things. I'm not seeing the option on my end, but if you look on your end, for folks that are hard of hearing, there is supposed to be a little button that says CC for closed captioning. So go ahead and hit that button if you see it. If it is not there, let me know so I can ask Substack about letting me have it a little bit earlier than they planned to. And also, if you were on my Patreon list or in the Facebook event, or just looked at my Patreon in general or through notes, there is a PowerPoint where you can follow along. Because I am one of the people still on phone only, I'm not able to screen share. So if you want to open that up, there's going to be, because my spouse went through and corrected some errors on my PowerPoint, there is going to be a new one uploaded after this class. So hi and welcome. Let me know if you're ready to go. I'm going to jump right in and you should be able to catch up. It is like 62 slides and notes, and I usually have a system of putting together a class in 3 to 6 weeks. And obviously that did not happen today because I was mad on Wednesday and Spirit went, well, you're going to do something. What do you need to do this? And I said I needed 10 new subscribers on my Patreon to do this because I have to set other work aside to put together a class. And they said, fine, do it in 2 days. And you need to do this on Saturday. So, hi, Saturday is a great day for Justice Magic, especially if you like astrological alignments. So, hi, everyone. This class is on strategic justice magic with a civic focus. So, this is magic usually intended to do for your community, although I have never met someone who did not get something personal out of doing it. I'm Diana Rachel. I am the author of Hex Twisting Counter Magic Spells for the Irritated Witch and Urban Magic, a Guide for the City Witch. So not only do I obviously fall on the side of believing curses are real, believing that we should include land spirit, believing we should follow the indigenous leads in most things when it comes to preserving our planet. I'm also passionate about not just equal opportunity, but equal accountability for everyone. So the entire premise of this class, because I talk about class scope, is a just society. The only thing that really works is that everyone is equally accountable. Beyond that, there cannot be such a thing as healthy conformity. We are meant to be diverse. This is part of how nature works. So in a just society, everyone is equally accountable. That's it. And beyond that, conformity of belief, practice, and being is unhealthy. Right now, we very much continue to live under a system of certain people going, the rules are for you, but not for me. No. And I'm going to keep changing the rules to continue to make sure they apply to you and not me. And that is, anytime someone complains about wokeness, that's what they're really saying, even though some of them don't realize that's what they're really saying. So I am coming forward with compassion for all, with the understanding that we all have our life experiences and end up where we end up for a reason. But what it comes down to is this is the balance I am trying to help people either restore, or have we ever really had it, or just finally attain, because we're at a crisis point and we need to not be. So when I'm talking about what is strategic justice magic, this is magic that is not necessarily for your immediate personal benefit, but it is for the benefit of a larger group. It is small magic, small smells, little things, small smells. Also small smells, especially if you like to use aromas in magic, is very effective, especially if you need to change your mindset. But it is figuring out exactly where to pull the little Jenga bar, or exactly where to put the tack so something steps on it. Just small, actionable things that they aren't grand. You may never get attention for them, but you have the relief and satisfaction of seeing things get better for those little things you do. And we'll be talking about strategies, spell structures. I do not believe intent is everything, but intent is massively important. It's just not everything. Using divination after you structure your spell, because this way you can get a visual of how it really is going to play out. And choosing your targets carefully, especially since a lot of people in the Bind Trump movement fell off because they found out the hard way that there are things set to protect the offices they were going at. There were things set to protect the people while they were there. And there's been a lot of spiritual injuries and other things that people aren't talking about, and we need to be honest about when this stuff happens. So this is what I did. Granted, I got in my own trouble, but I'm way more stubborn than the average human. Therefore, I'm here, so I have this to share with you all. Because the last 2 weeks were completely unacceptable to me, and I am seeing that other people felt that way too. So let's move things forward. So, when I am talking about strategic justice magic, strategic, pick a small, specific issue. Justice, this comes with the motivation and intent of fairness and generosity. Justice can get tricky. Many years ago, I used to work with the goddess Nemesis, and I knew I was taking an enormous risk. I had to know I was not in the wrong if I petitioned her, because the way Nemesis works is she judges the person who calls her first, then she judges the other person and evaluates. And if she decides that the person who called her is in the wrong, they're the ones who end up suffering. Fortunately, I've never ended up suffering, but that is an uncomfortable evaluation to subject yourself to. But this is where we're at. It really does have to be justice. That means that you are going to, in some situations when you do this work, see people you personally don't like thriving. And you're just going to have to be okay with that or take the petty to a private place, which I judge you a little for that, but human's human, and sometimes you've got to. So, and when I mean magic, I'm talking about we're working with spells, we're working with spirits, with nature. We're not serving or protecting nature. We are inviting nature to work with us. This is the animist side of things, where nature gets the say, rather because it doesn't actually sit there passively. We are talking about allies and spirits that bring justice or that care because it involves their descendants, it involves work they did, and so on. So, going on to the next one. All of this falls under the urban magic umbrella. And I know that there are some people who've been very reactive to the idea of cities and magic because they really, the idealism at the end of the 19th century occultism movement was just as the Industrial Revolution was happening and cities were gross. Cities were historically gross until around 1950 or so. And the not gross part in the 1950s was not always for healthy reasons. But what people need to understand is cities are just a series of human habitations in a group. Just like farms are a series of human habitations in a group. Both have an impact on the environment, both have an impact on the economy, and they are completely interdependent. A city is part of an ecosystem that has interdependent relationships with natural resources, with farming, with industries, with space, with the stars, with the trees, with everything there, with the lands and the waters. It is part of an ecosystem. These are just habitats. And some are good, some are bad. I mean, I have seen some sea otters make some environmentally questionable choices, but they're cute, so they get away with it. Humans aren't as cute. So when cities developed because of the Industrial Revolution, because there was new work, the people that came to the cities were often younger children who weren't going to inherit anything, queer people. Queer people have been around throughout history because it's just queerness wasn't recognized as queer until certain ideologies took hold. Nobody cared until they were told to care and get all up in everybody's business, each other's business. And artists, creative people who didn't necessarily feel the calling to work the land the way everybody else was working it. So cities came, especially in the United States, to house the rejected and abused. And of course, now you've got these people who are either convinced of these abusive ideologies, who are going after and blaming them city folk, or people who are trapped in the abusive ideologies and are projecting things onto cities, even though they are completely interdependent with them as well. And we need to fix that. We need to fix this constant us versus them thing. And part of waking up, there's nothing wrong with being aware that something ain't right here. And the fact that it's being marketed as woke is bad really should be setting off alarm bells in everybody's head, because that means that somebody does not want people to wake up and smell the bullshit. And so you don't have to live in a city to have a relationship with one. You have one whether you like it or not. At this point, because of the way the economy works, we have relationships with cities across the world that we don't even know the names of, because we are bringing products into our home. We are experiencing their environmental stuff. You get the idea. So if it's nature magic, if it's nature centered, it still fits in the city. We're still affected by weather. We're still affected by seasons. We still grow food in cities. So we still have wild areas in cities. I'm looking at one on my property in the middle of the city right now. And the other part, and the reasons that cities get targeted and dismissed, is activists tend to network in cities because that's where the places to actually meet are. That's where the places where people do the government things are. So civic magic is inherently urban magic, and I'm not going to go into the historical lecture because we all got work to do, so we can be fascinated and geek out on the other stuff when it's time to rest. So the next part, and a lot of what I talk about when I'm teaching magic, is I encourage people to shift the way they think about things, not to dismiss or let go of traditions they've learned. Pardon me, my throat's a little bit sore. So the next part, for those that might be following the PowerPoint that you can get on the Patreon, it's a public post, you shouldn't have a problem getting it. It's picking your focus. And here's the part that everybody who's like a bleeding heart, cares about everything, including me, hates to hear. You can only ever fix one problem at a time. As much as I would like to fix the flush mechanism on my toilet and fix whatever the heck is going on with my dishwasher, I can only do one of those at a time. It would be cool if I could, but probably not healthy. I have some workaholism issues already. But when it comes to these big social problems, the bigger the problem is, the more you need to break it down to just one tiny baby step. And sometimes those baby steps can take enormous amounts of energy by themselves. Sometimes they don't. I'm working on a whole series on low spoons magic for those issues. But you have to pick one. So it's either pick what you're maddest about, pick what's impacting your life the most, or pick what's impacting the people you love the most. So for me, I have got a very broad menu to pick from because I am queer, I am a woman, and people in some of my loved ones are minorities, and I have had to work with people that have had to hide from ICE. I have had neighbors that I adored that have had to hide from ICE. So everything affects me. So I still have to go, what's important to me now? And really, for me, I just go with what I'm mad about. My anger needs healthier expression, so I may as well do this. And the most important thing I want to say, because I have seen this happen where I've been to these beautiful rituals where gorgeous energy was raised, and then the energy got released, and it basically just, like, I watched as it just sort of fizzled into the ground. Magic does not multitask. Spells work best when they are allowed their maximum impact, which means that you can only target one thing at a time. Now, when I showed this to my spouse, Cinti, because neurodivergent brain has to be very specific, pointed out that spirits can multitask and spirits are part of magic. And for me, because it didn't even occur to me to think that way, because to me, spirits have become less magical as they've become more part of my day-to-day existence, especially the animistic spirits. But yes, spirits can multitask when they want to, but spirits also have their own stuff going on. But when you are casting spells, one spell does one thing at one time. And that's what you need to do for maximum impact. So I will say that I have a list of spells that I want to create as the result of this workshop. We'll get to that at the end. And I probably will be putting them in my Patreon. But for now, they're things that I am sharing the ideas so you can create them and share them or not, depending on what you're doing. So for those that are on the slideshow, you have now come to the slide that has our mascot Void Scream Demon. So he wants to do the void screaming for us so we feel better and we can do what we need to do. So when we're talking about one specific cause, the thing that set me off, that led to me creating this workshop and asking people to support me in it, is the American Accountability Foundation uh, decided to start sending threatening comments and pushing for erasure of Black women in STEM. I can't even remember which agency they did this with. And the fact that they have the unmitigated gall to call themselves an accountability foundation when they're doing bullying, racist shit like that definitely just pissed me off. And there are several organizations like this. So right now we're mostly being bullied by the American Heritage Foundation, but there are several other little foundations of wealthy bullies that are not protected the way our government offices are protected. They do have protections, don't assume they don't, but they are much easier to disassemble, and it is much easier to persuade these people's own ancestors that, hey, you sprouted a dick. Can we cut it off, please? And again, there's still some work, but you won't get the walloping that a lot of people did when they decided to go up buying Trump without checking their stuff first. So there are two approaches to magic. My reaction, this is a reaction. So this entire class is me being reactive. I am responding to the awful thing they did. And so I want to hold them accountable for what they've already done. There is another way you can do it that is probably the smarter way. And a lot of us don't because we get caught up in our lives and it doesn't occur to us. And in ancient societies, it was somebody's job to be the augur and to say, hey, this is coming. We need to do something about it. In modern societies, we are deliberately so overloaded on the levels where the people who would catch this are that it doesn't even occur to us. So the proactive approach is okay, what are these bastards going to do next? And so we need people to kind of split between the reactive and proactive, because again, you try to do all of it, it's going to burn you out. You try working it into your life in an integrated way where there is nourishment, support, and relaxation before and after is going to make this practice a lot more sustainable. And right now, most of us are working multiple jobs. We are dealing with strains. The healthcare industry alone is a working class trap. So often we are just too freaking overloaded and tired to do it. And this is where bringing in spirit allies comes in handy, because our spirit allies can help us with this. So the next part that we need to do, so we've got the reactive, we've got the proactive. Here is something that's been missing from the conversation. And there was a spiritual event I was at last weekend. God, was it 2 weeks ago? Or I think it was last weekend, where I was asked by a very important spirit, do you want war or do you want peace? And I think most of us truly want peace. And here's the reason that we keep missing the mark. First, the people that are keeping us constantly overwhelmed do not want peace. War is extremely profitable most of the time. And they are choosing to be in denial about it's not going to be so profitable when you're destroying your resources and you keep destroying populations. People are not wanting to repopulate. People are not wanting to make the cute white babies that you think exist when they don't. The next most important question, the one we never seem to ask, is what does peace look like? And so for the magic to work long term, for the magic to work to the point where you don't need to do it anymore, you need to have a vision of peace for your life, for your neighbor's life, and understand that your neighbor is not going to have the exact same vision. So there has to be some harmonization happening. And you have to know that, one, what are you specifically working for? So these are the questions that are on the PowerPoint. These are things you can use in journaling and shadow work. in planning your spells. And I think these are important questions to ask, because without these visions, you're kind of shooting the magic blind, and we need to be less blind. The reason we're in the position we're in is this started like 40, 50 years ago, where progress was happening, but the conservatives used this concept called incrementalism, and it got us. It really did sneak up on all of us. We were complacent, we were overloaded, we were overworked, we did not realize that how effective the creep was, and on top of it, people could not agree on what was most important or what peace looked like. And so here we are. So, what are you specifically working for? What is your investment in justice? What do you want to get back from it? What do you want to see? What do you need to do to feel like it was worth it? What needs to happen for you to know that you're done? Like, there's always going to be stuff. This is just the nature of humans. There's always going to be somebody who tries to get around the rules. So, what do you need to see happen to feel like, okay, I can turn my attention to myself now? I can turn my attention to my family or my personal goals. What do you need there? Where do you need to be personally when you're done? And this can be literal. This can be like what geographic location. This can be what emotional place you're in, any of it. And what steps do you need to take to get to be where you're going to be? There is no removing yourself. Selflessness, the way we've been taught it, is frequently very unhealthy and is actually frequently part of how the oppressors program us. So looking to yourself first, and then making sure that the needs of others around you and the causes you work for are compatible with your needs is hugely important. And so how do you balance your needs with what you're working towards? That is the next most important thing. Look at that, because there are some days where you might want to go be on a picket line and drawing sigils for people to walk over to get them in the right headspace. But your rent's due, your mortgage is due, and housing takes priority over activism, because how active are you going to be if you're struggling to find housing? So those priorities have to come first. Putting your own basic needs first is hugely important. So the next part, and this is a little bit trickier, because there's this you should care, and nobody explains the should. Why is there a should? And there's so much to care about, and for even the people with the biggest hearts, you still have to prioritize what you do about them, even if you care about everything. So first, do a self-check. Why do you care? What, like the things, I get the maddest about racism. And the reason I care is there are people I love very much who are people of color. They are my family. They are loved ones. Of course, I get mad about racism. I also get mad about racism because I'm Polish American. And I remember growing up in a small Indiana town where I was basically not white in the social hierarchy until a Black kid showed up, and then I suddenly was. And it pissed me off for me, and it pissed me off for him, and that has been part of who I am ever since. So, what about these specific situations speak to your desire for justice? And what does justice look like to you? What does resolution look like for you? And make sure you distinguish between justice and revenge. I've had to have some difficult talks about absolutely you were owed reparations, but you are not owed revenge. And this is a difficult conversation to have, because we are trying to coordinate efforts with everyone being respected. And trauma can ask for things that are not fair, and it's not those unfair things aren't necessarily going to heal the trauma. So ask yourself, what does resolution to these causes feel like in your body? Like, you see the thing, you're angry about it, you're scared about it. And so you imagine if this got resolved, you pause and imagine a situation playing out where everything is resolved, justice is restored, balance is restored. How does your body react to that? What does your body need to get to that reaction? And look at this, because one of the best pieces of wisdom I've ever heard was from people that used to do the rainbow rides and would do the picket lines. And when they were told, well, how have you managed to last so long without burning out? The answer was, we did it for ourselves. We got something out of this. This was meaningful to us. We weren't just doing it for a neighborhood. Yes, we were doing that for our neighbors, for our community. But there was a part of it where we were doing it for ourselves. So if you are going to take on this cause, what part of it is you doing it for yourself? For me, when I do it, is I'm not scared for my family and friends. That's why I'm doing it for myself, is to fight that fear, is to not have a reason to have that fear. What do you need to get back in exchange for the energy you're putting in? For me, being able to hang out with my friend is plenty. For others, you might need to go into nonprofit work because you do feel like you need to get paid for this, and that's okay. That's what you need back to put this in. Okay. Go on idealist.org, find a thing that makes total sense. So look at that, look at and think about what reasonable energy exchange is. And this isn't just the tit for tat, something, I need something back. This is also part of avoiding burnout when you're doing this kind of work, is you really do need to know what you need from it so you can plan accordingly and scale how much effort, the size of the magic you put on, the amount of time you spend in the magic. If you need to do a whole elaborate altar because you want to put big energy in, which I'm not someone who really does that anymore. I do small stuff because I found it far more effective. But also, I have kids with ADHD. It took me almost 4 years to set up an altar, and then it took me another 4 years to do it again. I have to be realistic to the circumstances I'm living in. So there's a lot of times where I'm just walking around town talking to myself and marking things with chalk. It is what works for you in the circumstances you're in. And the only people grading you are other humans who don't know shit, because the magic's going to work if it's going to work. And that's not something somebody on the internet really has space or authority to have an opinion about. So let's go into the spell structure that I was talking about. So let's talk about the structuring the civic magic spell. And again, I have like a little, I have a slide that has all the things that might be popcorning up in your head. And you need these because these are your motivators. So when I talk about spell construction, I don't talk about intent. Intent is the middle. It is a very important piece, but it is not the only important piece. And intent by itself unsupervised can often lead to more backfires than you would imagine. So motivation, what's your motivation? It's the what happened to who. And so I have things like, because these are my friends, because the world is chaos, because it's my life, because it's someone I love. Who is this for? How is this impacting your life? So the next part is the impact. So you've got the motivation, you've got the intent, you've got the impact. On the motivation, take some time. And yes, this is mini shadow work. I've said in other classes I've taught in the past, shadow work is forever work. It really is just the art of cultivating self-awareness, knowing that that is a forever job. Know why you're doing what you're doing, especially when you're trying to take on magic for a civic cause. Know your why. What stories from your past are influencing you? For example, me and my friend Kelsey moving to town is still a major story that influences me. Another one is one of my best friends was afraid to tell me that she'd been dragged out of her car by police because she knew that at the time I had the money and the sass. I would have been in that Oregon Police Department screaming at everybody to get an answer for their behavior if she told me at the time. So she waited so I wouldn't. And she shouldn't have had to. She shouldn't have been in a situation where there was something to be afraid to tell me. And I was livid about that. So what are the stories? It could be stories about people you don't even know that influence that. What do you want? What do you want out of a change in the world? What do you want to see? What do you need to experience? What emotions are informing your action? In my case, I am a protective mama bear type. I have a lot of rage for a lot of reasons, and it needs healthy places to go. So that's what I get out of it, is I get something to do with all this rage that's always built up in me. And I also get to feel better later because people I care about are safe. What narratives from social media and from your life are influencing your view? Like, I noticed that I am a lot meaner to men around me when I'm reading Jezebel blog. And some of that may be justified, but it's also a narrative and an attitude that is starting to infect my thoughts. So I need to step back and go, am I taking this person on a case-by-case basis? Am I looking at them for who they really are? So, and what are you hoping for at the end of all of this? Like when everything's done, everything's said, what will be the thing that feels best in your body? And here's the other part that always sneaks in. What do you hope for that you don't want to say out loud? And it could be, I want to get, I want people to applaud me for this. Well, this is not really applause style work, and I'm a Leo. This can be hard. Because we like to get pats in the head and recognition for what we do, and this is not the place for it. So fortunately, I have plenty of spirits that are more than happy to give me the praise and adulation and then tell me to shut the fuck up and do my job. But not everybody has that kind of relationship. So be honest with yourself. Even if it seems ridiculous, you need to recognize that part of yourself and find a way to speak to it. Otherwise, it usually creeps in at bad times. So when you are doing your intent shaping, and hi, I saw someone joined us. If you look on the Substack, if the notes field, and I believe I send it out in an email for Substack subscribers, there is a link to a public Patreon post where you can download the slideshow. I will be updating the slideshow because Cynthia made a few corrections after the fact, because of course I always find the typos when I'm giving the presentation. So we are on the intent slide, which is like slide 15. So let's talk about intent. And again, I am not from the Intent is Everything Club, but the Intent is Effing Important Club. So when you're shaping your intent, you need to think through. I think that a lot of people go, my intention is to get more money, and they don't think it through more than that. And this is where you end up with monkey's paw stories and other things like this. It's completely avoidable. The monkey's paw result is extremely rare to begin with, and usually somebody's, you peed in somebody's Wheaties when that kind of stuff happens. But for this one, be very clear, because you are dealing with community magic, which means community means many people and non-human persons. And so you have a higher risk of unintentional impact, even with very small things. So walk through, what would you like to happen? Okay, you would like to see more money come into your town. What would you like to change? Okay, it looks like a lot of the people that are working in this town are getting cancer because of where they're working. I would like to see money come in that lets them be healthy. Okay, and what emotional timber do you want to the situation? I would like people to be less stressed out. Well, that would rule out a healthcare agency coming into town, because health is very stressful. The healthcare industry is a very stressful place to work right now. Okay, what about green energy? Might be okay. There would be other aspects that you might want to look at. But bringing in I would like something that is healthy, that allows people to be relaxed, that allows people to feel secure, that allows people to have the money they need to have the basic needs met. Or it can be like, I am ticked off at that foundation. What would I like to happen? Well, in my heart of hearts, I would like to see that foundation completely collapse. What would I like to change? Well, I can't make them less racist. Mental influence is really hard when you've got egregores locking in certain beliefs like racism. But what would be reasonable is I want them to see that racism has punishment instead of reward. That might work. And what emotional timber do you want in this situation? So if you're trying to do something for your township, get community in, I want people to be relaxed. In my case, I already know that making them afraid makes them worse. I want them to feel ashamed. I want them to realize that there is a valid reason to look at them with the disgust they are projecting onto other people. Now, I've already learned from a few things in recent years where hexing is actually not as effective for this, because hexing just gets people all up in their feisty, but humbling someone brings them to that state where all of those things where they think that they're the ones that's better. And most of this moral stuff we're looking at is not they think they're right. A lot of people will go, well, everybody assumes they're right. And it's never quite, I've observed, at least with US Americans, and I don't think that's true, because I have had many people just freely admit to me they know damn well what they're doing is wrong. And what it comes down to is they think they're better. It's not about right or wrong, it's about status. So a lot of the magic I do looks for where the status rug is, where, that overpriced Oriental Persian rug, whatever, and yanks it out from under them. So they're hitting the cement with the rest of us. And that's not a hexing because I'm not wishing them harm. I'm wishing them consequences, which is different. Now, sometimes the consequences do hurt, but this is what humbling does. So just the getting them off that self pedestal. Again, this is part of what I do and how I work. My moral systems came about from my lived experience. Yours will come from yours. And so hopefully the recording will be a bit better. I did see that my internet was unstable there. I don't have much control over that, but hopefully y'all were able to catch that last part. And if not, you can always ask me about it later. And I don't know if there's a chat option here. If you do have questions, it's fine to ask them as you go, but I will get back to them at the end of this. So the last part is the impact. This is how you want your magic to land. Well, if I want to humble an entire organization of people, I have to be mindful of, is this going to harm their kids? Like I usually add riders to make sure no children are harmed when I'm doing my work, especially when it's something that's definitely going to have a chain reaction. Is this something where they are going to, the impact I want to have is they start treating people better. They start, they do not believe that bullying is rewarding. I don't want anybody to get bullied. I want them to see that there isn't a reward in it. So the questions I ask when I'm going through is, what do you want the result of your work to be? Well, the work that I want to do to take on this foundation is, one, I want them to stop existing, but I also want them to realize that the people they're looking down on shouldn't be. And it's not because it's all because them looking down on them is a them problem, and they have no business making it a problem for the people whose success offends them. Do you want the circumstances to play out gently or violently? Usually I find that gentles last longer. It's not as fun for me, but it lasts longer, and I'm a long-term thinker. Who is in the sphere of impact with your spell? That's why I bring up kids, maybe employees, maybe people that they might call ice on. That's one of the things we divine for and look for to make sure, again, that we are targeting our impact very carefully so that anything we do is best for a harmonious impact rather than a fully destructive one. Again, what I'm trying to teach here is how to build peace when we've kind of forgotten what that looks like. And is there anyone to shield from impact? Now, again, we're talking about kids. We may be talking about a spouse that is in a violent situation or who is frequently the person that they unload on, or a neighbor, or like the random kid collecting lantern flies across the street. So these are all things to account for when you're measuring the impact in this kind of work. So once you've got there, you've got what you want to happen. The next part is choosing your ritual action. Excuse me. So for your ritual action, and I know that a lot of people that I'm seeing here in the class that I know, a lot of us have our own acquisitions over many years of spell tools. So, I have a variety of toys, crystals, things that I probably wouldn't have if I'd known the environmental impact at the time, but since it's out of the ground, I'm going to use it. But for people that may not necessarily have resources, or who live in compact spaces, or like me, sometimes cannot find things for years at a time, this is just how I'm living. When you choose your ritual action, you have some no cost and low cost options. So think about what is doable for you and what tools are available to use. So there are some great no cost ones. I love magic with words. So rhyming, poetry, singing, chanting, any kind of daily prayer practice, the good old fashioned energy ball. And so please comment if you've never heard of the energy ball. I can talk you through a basic and how to do it at the end of this, because in my opinion, it's the baseline of energy work. It's something, honestly, I don't think that my spouse uses anything besides that and just deal making with spirits. And it is massively effective. And especially if you're like me and you can easily get big mad, that's a good way to use that energy so it's not ravaging your organs and it's doing something that's good for the world and something that burns it instead of something that, yet again, burns it down. Creating sigils from found material is a really cool one. I did not know the practice existed until I had a client who was getting targeted by people just doing these piles of leaves and rocks. And I realized that, okay, in her case, that was annoying and bad, but that's kind of a cool idea. And in urban magic, especially, you don't just have to stick with leaves and rocks. You can work with any found material because the way I think of it is there are just things that everything started with organic material unless it came from off the planet and it's still a kind of organic. It's just post-organic because it's been resynthesized. And you can think through the way it got to be what it is and how that adds a specific type of energy to whatever random street sculpture you happen to be building that just happens to have motivation, intent, and impact woven into it as you design it. So I may start like wandering around Kalamazoo and playing with things I find on the sidewalk. I'll be very careful about the things I play with. I know somebody's worried about that. Now, there are some low cost methods as well, things where you can get it at a dollar store or it's low investment. Um, things like chalk. I'm a city priest. I almost always have chalk in my bag somewhere. I can draw sigils. I think that a lot of people have been applying my limbic hijack sigil on a very large basis already in the last few days. But things where if I know things are starting to get a little bit unhappy for bad reasons, water and tea offerings. You can always brew some tea at home. You can make some teas if you're familiar with the plants that grow around you. Evaporating potions. So again, putting things out to evaporate, a little salt in the water, a little bit of things that you want to give to the air and the water and the land, and let it incorporate it in whatever way it needs to by letting it evaporate. Candles and incense are usually they can be cheap or expensive depending on where you go or what you want from it. I was a dollar store witchcraft person for many years of my life. I think I may still have some candles from my dollar store days. Notebook altars. So this was something, especially for people that need an altar, having a notebook or a sketchbook where you draw your altar or you collage it or you make it in some way so it's there and it's portable. And then you can put things out on top of it or put a serving tray on top of it to avoid setting on fire. These are all options you have. There are not limits here. And one of my favorite go-tos is string and knot spells because like I've used them to do cut and clears with toilet paper on a bad day. They're extremely handy, especially when you are on limited resources. So there's nothing the only things that should leave you out from magic is quite simply you needing your energy to survive and not having anything more for it. So if you're at survival mode, don't worry about this stuff until you're ready to worry about this stuff. Or use what energy you have for magic to help yourself survive. It is okay. Those of us that are doing a little bit better than that, especially when we've got these big feelings that need somewhere to go with that energy, we got you. So coming from that to the next is a little bit more in the choosing the ritual action as you think through what you want to do. I am a person who's gotten to the point where I will at least once a year work with explosives and spell work. And this is because, again, a lot of big mad, things go boom. It's cathartic. But one of the things I've noticed about my most effective spells that I've enjoyed the most, especially when they're doing small things, is that most of them tend to be based on a chemical action or reaction. Not all of them, but enough of them. And so there are certain things. I have a list of alchemical verbs that you could think about that would be very handy in civic magic as you're figuring out what specific small thing you want to do to add to the matrix to alter things so we have the equal accountability for all goal in whatever area that you want to go at it. So sublimation, where basically it goes from solid to gaseous, it's just not there anymore. Evaporation, where it goes from liquid to gaseous, it's not there, but it gets redistributed and usually comes back in a completely different altered form with a different experience of reality. Carbonization, that's the sciencey way of saying burn that down. Circulation, getting things going, getting good morale going, getting resourcefulness going, having a different meme circulate than some of the crazy stuff that's been seeded in us. Circulating the idea that evolution is okay, circulating the idea that, hey, more babies aren't actually going to solve all the problems here. Just starting to get these ideas, these more positive thoughts, these more positive narratives to what to move through. Redistribution, I'm going to leave you all to meditate on how that would be appropriate and equitable. And deflagration, which is basically just another word for blowing it up. So, and I know it's very tempting to just go at the things that are more heavily guarded to blow that up, but believe me, they are very prepared for that. And I may again, even I have to learn many things the hard way. So from there, and I apologize for drinking on camera. My throat gets too dry and I start coughing, and then it's just nah. So after that, a lot of traditions tell you to divine before you do a spell. I would say divine before you cast the spell, but divine after you shape and construct and think through the spell. And here's why: is one, you can do a card layout based on what you think your altar would look like or what you think that's going to look like. And granted, I haven't really used layouts very often. Very rarely. I only use them with Lenormand cards anymore. But for people that like that structure, it can show you things about the chain reactions and the chain of events most likely to happen as the result of what you put into the mix. So cause and effect. It also helps you figure out how to frame the spell. What is the story and the narrative you're putting in the spell? And what is the story and narrative that is countering your spell? So how do you get that to harmonize into a result that you want? It can also show you where there are spirits hanging out ready for what you're going to try to do. And it also can show you undesired outcomes with allies or with animistic spirits that just are, so they don't really have a choice about being present. And a lot of them are like, are you going to talk to me? Is anybody going to talk to me in this? You're literally walking all over me, but you're not talking to me. Freaking talk to me. And sometimes the land spirits will just help, especially if you're allied with them. But if you don't talk to them about how to help, they accidentally squish everybody. Because sometimes rocks fall, you all die seems like a perfectly good solution to an eternal being that ain't going anywhere. The other part that plays into this is there are a lot of traditions that don't necessarily acknowledge or directly work with certain entities that have awareness or have developed awareness. And I'm going to be talking about that because I know that it's going to be received as a little more out there towards the end. But I think that when you see where I'm going with all this, you may find this profoundly helpful. So, moving on. The SWOT divination. So SWOT is an acronym from business planning techniques that is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And there's no way there hasn't been some other tarot reader that has developed like multiple readings with this. This is the one that I've developed for this specific situation. So what we're looking at is tools of preparation for a SWOT divination, and it's a pretty long list. So I'm going to go over a lot of it with you because these are so some things I already have up and available to the public. Some things I'm going to need to make available either through my Patreon or through some other means. So one, I always tell people to do their inner work first. The more aligned you are internally, the less effort and more success you're going to have with things outside yourself. It's just how it is. And yes, it's a battle. That's why we're all struggling with our mental health. So one is the steamroller meditation. I do have a recorded version of this available to, I think it's to the public, unless my privacy settings got changed again, which happens sometimes. But there is a recorded meditation of imagining your inner world as like flora, fauna, a big field. But these represents all your assumptions, all the narratives, all the things, and steamrolling over that, they recover. But steamrolling over that to make sure that you are not jumping to conclusions. You're just steamrolling your assumptions. So it gets out of the way, out of your head, and you can look at things for what they are. The next one, and I haven't reposted this one because I consider this an extreme situation only, is the bulldozer meditation, where you're trying to get at what people have hidden. And it is exactly like it sounds like. You imagine the bulldozer going through your inner inner self or in the situation to dig up the things that are being missed, to dig up the things that people don't want noticed. Also, invisibility and privacy, present chance. I use this a lot with clients dealing with ICE, where it is just making them somebody else's problems field. I have products in Golden Apple for this that I made pre-2020, and I am thinking about whether I need to upgrade my formulas because they worked pretty good the last time, and everyone that used them is still in the US, so that's something. The other thing is having some vibe cleansing music or white noise. Part of this is because, again, you may be coming up against other people's protections and things they don't want you to see. So having this going is a way of continuously cleansing yourself, especially if you don't want to be standing in a field of smoke or you have asthma. And the sound vibrations can do a lot of what the smoke vibrations do as well. And this way, it's just continuously removing things from you. So this way you can continue to stay as clear and focused as you can. Another part is inviting your ancestors that are healed and whole. If you don't do a lot of ancestor work, be very clear that you want the healthy ones. Neighborhood spirits, especially those impacted by what you're trying to look into, and spirits of the community for. Also, like if this is for a specific living human community and you're putting this stuff together, ask for their input. There may be some protocols you don't know about or some spirits you don't know about where either you're stepping on toes or something where you can coordinate your efforts and make it that much better, but you can't know without saying, hey, I'm doing this. Would you be willing to look? And in some specific cases, you may need to pay for someone's time, even if it's just a small tip, to look at what you're doing and to encourage them to share their knowledge. The other part is asking for certain spirits to come under the laws of hospitality. The laws of hospitality is a whole workshop unto itself. But the idea is you don't harm me, I don't harm you. Can we have this communication? Here are the conditions needed. I will treat you as a guest while we have this interaction. And so far, most spirits, it's worked fine. And if they try to violate the laws of hospitality, the law acts on its own. There's nothing you really need to do. Something I've learned, especially because my brain gets full fast, is I will pray for retention of information when I'm doing divination, because otherwise it's just gone. And I know with my clients, I deliberately don't do that because it's a way of protecting privacy, because I'm not tempted to gossip if I can't think of it. But in situations like this, I may ask a specific deity or animistic spirit to help me with this. The other part, and this is again a little bit more of an advanced practice, is having a deity or an ancestor or some entity that you have a relationship with to act as your discernment check. So if something comes to you and says it's this, or some idea comes to you or some intuition, because people will send out misleads. Like there is a world of magic and counter magic out there. People will send misleads to people they know might get in their way in some way. And so you have those spirits and those relationships that can do the illusion checks and go, no, don't go there. Like, go to the woods and the answer is there. Don't, you get eaten. But something that will speak to you and help you as a safety system. So you're not just believing every random thing that comes to you and then getting yourself in a world of hurt. So those are the internal preparations. And yes, it's a lot, but if you're going to do this, even the little stuff, these preparations work and they can improve your quality of life in other ways, so they are well worth doing. The next part is the external preparation, making sure that you've got invisibility and warding on your home, your clothing, your recording devices, just something to prevent interference or to redirect interference or absorb it, whatever is appropriate to your energy style. So another thing, especially before you do the divination, and yes, because again, we're going to be coming up against stuff people don't want us to find. This is why we put all the effort in. Washing your heads, hands, and feet. So there are traditions, and there was, when I lived in San Francisco, it was just a local thing that all the tarot readers did, where not all of them, but enough of us that like we would wash our hands, feet, and head in coconut or coconut milk. I can't do that anymore. I'm allergic. So usually I will just use a cedar tea or something made from cedar wood to do the same thing, but something, or use Epsom salt as a rinse and a rub down when I'm in the shower. So it's something that just gets the blocks off, adds a little protective warding. I may anoint myself with a protection oil or with a success oil or something to ensure that there isn't further interference. And so I will also go so far as to create sigils for myself to avoid influence of perception. I've gone so far as to have tattoos made to avoid things manipulating my perceptions. So I am well aware how just the choice of words and exposure behaviors over and over can rewire a human brain. I am paranoid about that, so I make sure I have extra protections for that. So set up any circles, words, or prayers. And my spouse's favorite go-to, and it's become mine, is rather than using tourmaline or jet or these grounding stones, we use jasper. Because what jasper does, because usually what will happen is there will be energy that sinks in the tourmaline and then you need to bury it or you need to clean it. Jasper just redirects the energy. I've never had a piece of jasper I've needed to cleanse. Like it will like ask for something once in a while, but that's it. And you can even tell the jasper where to redirect that energy. So usually what I do is I take my piece of jasper and say, okay, anything that's trying to interfere with this class here, can you send it somewhere where its presence would be healthy, like something that needs disruption? And I'm not going to name things because the only things popping into my mind are truly traumatizing to say out loud. So just, redirect it where disruption would be healthy and helpful. Or it could be if you're feeling personal and spiteful, redirect it to somewhere where someone else deserves to have a bad day. I truly don't generally do that. It doesn't occur to me, except when I'm talking in classes like these. Um, Also, because making crappy people angry just makes them crappier, and I just don't need that in my life. So the other thing is having energy and cord cutting devices such as scissors and obsidian knives nearby. I have a practice where I do cord cutting before and after divination. I find that's very effective for making sure I don't carry things that are not mine to carry. And have a plan after the divination work because it's going to be plunging into some stuff. So have a plan for taking a bath if you like a bath or a shower, some tea, some snacks, burritoing yourself and watching a TV show, whatever it is, but have something that gives you time to nourish and restore, especially since when you do this kind of work, you don't necessarily get to have trigger warnings. So here I have a recommendation of protocols for SWAT divination. And so that starts with the energy cords. The next thing, disguise your energy signature. So you can do this in several different ways. Some people like to do mirrors and just like have a mirror say, just show it something completely false. I just use a technique where I just mentally like erase my footprints, or I will use different sigils at different times to cut or alter my energy. In a couple of very specific cases, I've done things to make my energy look like somebody else's, whether it's just projecting that I look like a different person, or a thing where I will just light a candle with a little birthday candle with an if this then that spell, where if somebody's looking, they see this person instead, or they sense this person instead. And yes, on occasion, I have used that to cause mischief because it keeps them too busy to bother me. Keep your phones off unless you're using them for record keeping. So unless you're trying to record your reading, turn them off. And if you can, seal reflective surfaces and image transmission items. There have been so many times where there's been nasty photos and other things that capture the energy of a bad spell. And they can be cleansed, but it's a pain in the butt. So my go-to is never ingest colloidal silver, but it is fantastic as an for external use. Colloidal silver is something you get at almost any place that sells flower essences will probably sell colloidal silver. And you just anoint your surfaces with that, and it's just put a dab on, let it dry, and that will turn off mirrors, that will turn off windows. I prefer to use whiskey for the corners of my house to make them impossible to pass through, but colloidal silver works too. Just don't drink it because eventually you turn blue. So the next one you can do is if you work with spirit allies or deities, you can ask them to turn attention away from you while you're doing this work. Again, a lot of these organizations do have their protections. They do have their workers. Often it is framed in Christian spirituality, but spiritual warfare, if you take it apart, is a type of spell work. Um, I'm not a religious witch, so I don't mind calling it witchcraft, but there are those that do just because of their own religious preferences. So that is something to keep in mind when you're doing this. The next part, and this is one that gets overlooked a lot, is have a dream warding practice. A lot of people will have perfect warding and stuff set up on their day-to-day life, but dream space is different from the astral and it is different from the animistic, and it needs its own type of warding. So this is something that would, again, take a different workshop for me to teach it because we got a lot to go through here. So that's the beginning and end stuff to make sure you have something redundant set up before you do the SWOT analysis reading. The next part is external preparation. So again, some kind of invisible warding on all recording devices if you are going to use them, so it's just you that sees them. I don't think Signal lets you record, but Signal seems to have a lot of really good metaphysical protections in it, or it's just such a void that the void has become, it's almost like, is there such a thing as anti-sentient? I don't know. We talked about the washing the head's hand and feet. Sigils to avoid influence on your perceptions. I talked about Red Jasper. Okay. I think I just went over the same slide twice. I apologize. So, okay. Tools of preparation. I see. Okay. So when we were doing this reading, and again, there's no way another tarot professional has not come up with a reading based on this. This is just mine for the civic activism. Is you want to look at the situation and the issues that created from the perspective of the target organization. So since I am ticked off at the racist organization, I want to know why part of their strategy was to go after women in STEM. What was that really about? Why were they going after Black women in STEM? What did they think they were going to gain on a larger level by harassing these women or suppressing their accomplishments? The next part is to remember when you're looking at this reading, because again, and I am saying a lot of this for myself because I use my rather large amount of childhood banked anger to fuel my activism magic so it has a healthy and constructive place to go. You have to remember when you're reading these cards, you're trying to read it from their perspective. So you may hear some things coming out of your mouth that you want to stop and go, ew, ew, ew. I encourage you not to do that, because if you do that, it disrupts you being able to understand as far as you can in something you're just not going to understand. So stay as neutral as you can. And no matter how empathetic you might feel towards these people after you realize that, oh, this one had it, like if you start going down board members or specific individuals, yeah, this one probably did have a bad mom. Yeah, this one does have a drug problem. That's fine, but people can have bad parents and have a drug problem and choose not to be abusive. There's still an element of choice there. And there are a lot of ways to learn how to regulate emotions these days. There's just ways made available that were not in the past. They still have choices about what they choose to do. So you have to understand how they are benefiting from their own abusive behavior as to understanding why it continues, so you know where the linchpin is to pull to get it to collapse. Also, and this is something that my spouse has said since we met, and this is some extremely good advice when you're doing anything with magic or the occult. And actually, it's just good life advice. You don't know what you don't know. Beware of thinking you do. So there will always be more to know than we see. There will always, especially in witchcraft and the occult, there is always more to learn. One of the reasons I didn't start teaching until I was over 40 is it really took me that long to feel like I actually had the knowledge banked. And I've seen people with way less experience, and some have a lot of good to say. I wouldn't have felt right about it. And I know sometimes I now get discouraged from launching into studies because it slows down my teaching, because I'm like, but there's so much more. Well, yeah, but people need to learn what I know. But I do not know everything, not even close. So when we were going into the strengths reading, and so at the end, you'll see the layout, and it's just 4 cards in a square. And you pull, based on your intuition, up to 7 cards for each one. So for each of these questions. So like what I mean is like only 7 questions will apply. So you need to decide what feels right to pull for. And you may not even need 7 cards. It's going to have you stop when you know what you need to know. And you may think of different questions to ask based on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So on the strengths, some of the things to look for when you are looking at how to go at this: what protects the organization? What protects the members of the board? Because there are people, especially if you're going for a for-profit corporation, the board members are the humans that make the awful choices. Think about the Blue Cross guy that thought that he could put a timer on anesthesia. Like, why? What crack was he smoking? Are any of the board members psychic, clairvoyant, or do they hire magic workers? Do they hire psychics and clairvoyants? Because they do, I can tell you. What feeds the board members? What doesn't, like, and by this I don't just mean money and food. What are the things they need? Does this person need a lot of attention? Does this person enjoy people's pain? Does this person need to feel like they live in a bubble? Like, sanitation is the most seductive thing of the wealthy lifestyle, is the sanitariness of it, is the not having to see anything unpleasant, and when you help the poor, you literally don't see them. So find out what feeds them, what gives them a sense of nourishment, what gives them a sense of comfort. Are there corporate or organization egregors involved? With startups, usually there's not an egregor. Startups are psychically vulnerable, so they're easy to collapse, but more established organizations, very hard to collapse. And I know I'm at the point where there are certain corporate egregors that ask to have audiences with me as a city priest because of that interdependence. So that's something to look at, because you need to know not just if you're coming up against a giant, but how big that giant is and how independent from the humans that created it that giant is. Because there are certain entities that begin as an egregor that can become animistic. And the measure is basically they either start a weather event, that's usually something with cities, or they become so entrenched that there's no getting rid of them. Like, even if, so I would say that the spirit of ancient Rome still very much exists in modern day, even though the city technically doesn't exist, because it is so anchored in this reality. There is no removing it. Ancient Rome is just here and will be here forever. It's the same idea. So, are there any organizations hiding behind the organizations? This one's tricky. So this is something I've learned to do when I'm reading for things, is I will put 3 or 4 cards face down and say, and this is what they don't want to be seen, or this is what's hiding, or this is what's underneath. And almost every time the reading will look exactly how whoever I'm reading on about would want me to see it. And then I pull the cards and I find all the chinks. And so far I've had fairly good confirmation on this from my clients. What types of spiritual energy are present? Now, this is something where I am seriously thinking about pitching Crossed Crow, a spirit identification deck, to help people that don't necessarily have the relationship with the spirit world that I do, because I see so many misidentifications that can become really dangerous. But we need to know, like, are we dealing with an animistic spirit deal? Like, did somebody make a deal with the mountain so we can't get around this? Are we dealing with someone who is working with jinn or demons? Those are extremely rare. What is very common is people that are using Christian spiritual energy for corporate warfare, and they will work with angels, because a lot of people just assume, well, it's angels, they're good, they're fluffy, they can only do good and right. That ain't true. Angels do not have whatever made them, whoever made them, they don't have the authority to filter or judge. I would liken them to being on the autism spectrum, in that they are in a very specific place in the autism spectrum, in that they are very literal. They do not discern between good and bad. If you tell them to do the thing, they will go and do the thing. And then it turns into a matter of human versus human, who is more convincing and has more power, if you're calling the same angel back and forth and telling it to do a different thing. And I will see a lot of angelic magic when I am looking at these corporations and some of these really awful nonprofit organizations. Is part of what's feeding their sense of self-righteousness is, well, the angels will work with us. Well, the angels are kind of helpless victims in this too, and they can pack a hell of a wallop if you don't know what you're doing. So that is something to look for some of the spiritual energies present, and it gets weird. Are there spirit workers in the mix that can be hired, that can be people there, that can be people with just long secretive lineages? I know there's like an old money guy on TikTok who's an old school occultist, and you can tell his family's been doing it for a couple hundred years. So it's out there. It's a reality that we do have to take into account. Is it's not one person owns magic. Magic and spell work is a completely neutral thing. Like just like money is a completely neutral thing. Money is on the same side as magic, where it is just a force that can get used for good or evil depending on whose hands it is. It's in. The other part is, are there spirits in the mix? And here's the tricky part, is, are these spirits willing to be in the mix? There's a lot of things like bindings, coercions, trappings, where I've had to deal with a lot of spirits going, okay, if you get me out of this obligation I never asked for, I will do X to pay you for the service. So that is something that can come up a lot, where I might have my spell in mind and I'll find the spirit and the spell goes out the window, because the spirit's going to do that work for me, and it's going to know things that I will be happier not knowing in order to deal with the issue. So these are some parts of it. So then you're moving on to the weaknesses, and sometimes looking at the strengths will reveal the weaknesses pretty well. Sometimes you're just like, oh, I'm up against this. Most of these people do have a chink in their armor, and that chink is always that they're not as good as they think they are. That is usually the chink. In a few cases, it is they are genuinely terrified of the other dirty humans out there. So when you're looking at the weaknesses in the reading, look at the driving force behind the injustices committed. It is almost always emotional. Ego is part of it, but there's usually some kind of emotional yearning behind it. Whether it is to feel like they're the best, whether it is to only look at the pretty people, something. What are the fears propping up the injustice? There always is a fear either of loss, of not being able to keep their resources, of being turned on. And sometimes the fears are more complex, and it comes down to the, if this doesn't work out the way I want it to work out, I'm going to have to change how I see myself. And so what is the linchpin to the mental structure of I'm better behind those on the attack against the vulnerable? So that I'm better mentality, what's holding that up? What makes that important? Because that's usually where the key weakness is. And that is what you can craft an aspect of your spell to when you are crafting the impact as opposed to the intention. So that's where you're looking for. That weakness is where you figure out the best way for the impact to land for the result you want. So my question, because of course I am taking that big mad energy and saying, okay, what would make the organization fall apart? What would make the egregor fall apart? Does the egregor take bribes? Is the egregor happy with who it's becoming? So these are things where there can be weaknesses, where the overarching, like Google, the egregor is not happy with who it's becoming. There is a weakness there. What would make specific board members fall apart? But you need to make sure it's the right board member, because there's always that one guy that everybody's been waiting for the nervous breakdown. You go for him, it's an easy, but they have a plan for it. So despite that TV show Succession, most companies do a pretty good job of having insurance policies and written policies for, okay, that guy's down. All right, Larry, it's your turn. So that you would need to do the reading and notifying Larry, because of course, usually when Larry's up there, he makes a plan for what's after him. So if you're going to really go strategically there, you're like, okay, well, that guy's going to be out anyway. But so, okay, I'll take the easy mark and we'll hotfoot him. So he's just off wandering, just needs to live in the Florida Keys for some reason, pet alligator or something. And so that leaves Dave and Larry. So, okay, rather than going at Dave, who's the CEO at the moment, you go at Larry and then Dave, so they don't have a plan in place, and then things fall apart. That is part of the strategy, and that's part of the weaknesses you look for, is looking for those orders. It really is a very different way of thinking. And yes, it is kind of using evil for good if you think about it that way, but again, to me, All of this is neutral. Some is just more spicy neutral than others. All right, so you're moving on to the opportunities part. So here again is you're going to be, some of this stuff might make you mad, especially you're looking at it organizationally. What opportunities does this group have to create through committing injustice? Are they accurate and clear about the possibility of that specific gain? So that's the first part. What opportunities is the organization trying to create for themselves? So, for example, I don't think that the housing crisis is something that anybody's thinking through beyond, ooh, I can squeeze more money out of people. They aren't connecting that they're actually about to drive themselves out of business and cause a collapse. They're just thinking, okay, I need to hit this mark because, of course, the way most modern capitalism works is unlimited growth instead of sustainable growth. So their housing market in most cities in the US is at the edge of the unlimited before the bubble pops, and suddenly you're buying houses for $1 and seeing entire streets that are of houses that are foreclosed on. So this is where we're at again, and that cycle has been normalized. So that's like one of the many things where you just pick one thing that you care about and go at that. So this is something else that we have to consider. How are they choosing the targets and victims? So, for example, the American Accountability Foundation, they're trying to hold people accountable. So, why were they targeting Black women in STEM? How did that fit in with their narrative? How were these women not accountable for something? So that's the part where I need to understand what they were thinking, what the story was they told themselves to justify their behavior, and figure out who benefited and in what way. In this case, it's pretty obvious that it was an emotional benefit to someone who wants to see women's accomplishments made invisible. All right. So the threats to the organization. Now, obviously, you may pull a card that says you. That's going to happen. Um, but the threats that they consider threats, because most of them, one of the reasons I'm even able to do this and nobody's flagged me or anything. And I have things set up. So trying to, and it's badly for people because I think about this stuff, but also most of these orgs don't take witchcraft or magic seriously. They think we're all delusional. They think it's not real until shit happens. And then they're usually the first ones to book me and I have to bite my tongue. But who wants the same resources as the organization wants? That is the first threat that they take seriously. Who else is going for those resources? So I would guess with the Accountability Foundation, the American Accountability Foundation, they're looking at it as these women are taking jobs that belong to men. Now, never mind the men aren't as competent or as accomplished. They belong to men, which means that there are people there that are feeling, one, insecure at not feeling themselves reflected, but there are people in there that are struggling for work or have flunked out or just kind of suck at things and are mad that people don't. Um, who are their closest equivalent competitors? Who is doing the same things they're doing and trying to get the same resources? Sometimes they will see themselves as alignment, but usually there's something that they both want that they can't both have or think they both can't have because nobody taught them to share. They taught them to hoard, not to share. And then what circumstances are beyond the control of the organization? The circumstances may or may not also be beyond your control. However, I know that I live with the shaman. Shamans do things. Um, Sometimes when there's inclement weather conditions, I know that my partner will go have a conversation with the weather condition, and things will happen to certain buildings of certain organizations. um, so you may not have control, but you might, because like a storm's going to storm. Storm will storm and snake will snake. That's what my ancestors say to me all the time. Storm will storm and snake will snake, cut off the head, throw it away, and go back to what you need to do. If the storm's still going to storm, and you can have a conversation with the storm about where it's the lightning strikes and not get struck yourself, that is the hard part. You might be able to work with it with the, okay, you are something beyond this control of this organization. You're already going to do this thing. Is there a reasonable way without completely throwing off the weather pattern for you to go do this thing, say, over there? And there is a possibility it could work that way. So what is it that the organization and its specific board members fear? Now, that does require you finding the board members. I do recommend reading on the board members if you're really going to deep dive. You can find them if they're not listed on the website themselves. Usually, if you have library database access, there are business profiles where they're required to show their LLCs and show everybody who's on the filed LLC, or there's a state database of LLCs, both for profits and nonprofits, where you can get down to the names, find the photos if you want to go down that particular deep dive. And in some cases, I absolutely recommend you do. In some cases, when people hire me to help them figure out how to do this, that I will charge extra for the research time, but it can be pretty effective if you know exactly who you're going for. This is how you find your Larry and hit your Larry before you hit your Dave. So people coming in late, you'll know what that means later. We're talking about how to be using a SWOT analysis tarot reading after you've crafted a spell to see how things will play out, and to ask the right questions to figure out exactly what to target in an organization. The reason I suggest people do the reading after they cast the spell instead of before it, is so they can see the interlay between the way the spell is structured and the way the spell is structured with motivation, intent, and impact, and how that overlays with what's already going on with a specific organization or a specific situation you're trying to target. And there is a little bit of wicked mischief in the mix because I am Diana and I can't help myself. But this is also I'm really encouraging people to think about it this way, because you don't need to do big spells. You don't need to do big drama to get things back to a society, to get things to a point where there's a society where everyone has equal accountability. It's these little things, these little bits of strategic destructuring or restructuring that make a difference. So look at what lies in opposition to the group and what would be a natural predator to organizations like this. So this would be the place where most of the time there are some people who might actually deserve a Ponzi schemer getting into their board. It just depends on the day and how they do it. All right. Also, for folks that are just joining me, hi and welcome. We're about halfway through the class, and I am trying to get through it because I know we have things we need to do today. But if you check the notes or the Substack, there is a PowerPoint in the Patreon that is free to the public if you want to follow along. We are currently on slide 29. And this is just a common things I have found from doing readings like this when I'm analyzing a particular group that I am mad at and want to go at for some injustice. So, and I've talked about this a little bit as I've gone along the way, so I'm just kind of gathering it for your notes, is the least common thing I found is demonic pacts. You would think demons would be all up in corporations, especially, and they're not. They don't like, okay, I'm hearing someone say, we don't like assholes, which I know to not be true. However, in this case, they don't like people that don't keep their agreements. Most of the people that get to this level of money and power, remember, money, like magic, is neutral, but the people that get to this much control over it tend to be very selective and bad about keeping their agreements. So that is part of why demons won't do pacts with them. They need people that follow through. What I found that is extremely common when I'm doing the SWOT analysis reading and looking for magic that protects a certain organization or entity is you'll see a lot of Christian spiritual warfare and prayer magic. Sometimes I will see it with other Abrahamic religions, but mostly Christian, but this may just be part of living in the United States. I will see a lot of angelic magic, and if you go back and replay the video, you'll see why I explain how that works and why it's super common. The other part is ancestral entitlement, is their ancestors felt like they were the best and better, and so they're just driving this mentality that they are better, and that means that the rule should be for everybody else and not them. Things that will happen sometimes, and oddly, the place I see this the most is trailer parks, because I've lived in a trailer park and I was trying to figure out where the inertia was coming from and why I was seeing otherwise healthy people suddenly be set with an inability to improve things. And there was a sorcerer on the payroll that was influencing people to just not want to leave and stay in the bad financial deal. And I see this a lot with certain types of real estate, that in places with HOAs. So that's a red flag right there. There may be an animistic spirit that feeds through the organization that can go into ancestral stuff, or it can be deliberate. some of that may be too dangerous for you to take on. So you might go, okay, how do I scale this to something smaller or more strategic? How do I do a mouse and an elephant in this situation? Sometimes there are fairies that feed through the organization. Sometimes members of the organization are psychic vampires that just enjoy the massive layout and things that they can feed on. And the other part is the corporate egregor, especially if it is left unchecked, can become a sort of psychic vampire. That makes it very hard for people to get out of their jobs, their situations. I've never read on Amazon. The way Amazon keeps surviving, it kind of screams vampiric egregor. And I would not be surprised if Jeff Bezos would qualify as a form of psychic vampire. Like, how is that guy even still around? Things that generally don't happen as a result of the work you do, and you will be told up front, very few people grow a conscience because they think they have one. That's the problem, is part of them thinking I'm better and therefore the rules are for these other people, is because they think they're doing the right thing. That there is that part where they think they're doing the right thing, but it's not really the right thing. And there's this self-blindness. And again, you can't do somebody's shadow work for them. So sometimes this is what a humbling is for. Because I prefer humbling to hexing these days. Hexing takes more energy. Humbling tends to get the person to do it themselves. The other part is one of the things that is really hard for people on the more progressive side to understand is that we ourselves, because purity politics has poisoned us. There's just this politics of not good enough that has been causing us to tear apart otherwise good things because it wasn't about improvement. It was about, hey, I want to be seen as the good person. So my insight is to call out this thing that's not good enough. Look, we're accountable. And it was not thought all the way through. We all have to step away from the assumption that our morals are the right morals. This is why I say the only definition of a healthy and equitable society is one where everyone is equally accountable. And that is the only equality that really matters, is that equal accountability. So for those of you that are looking at the PowerPoint, we are now onto my slightly rainbow cards. Again, I don't really read with layouts anymore. So if I did this, it would be purely performative, but I understand that a lot of people really like layouts. And so looking at this, having the four corners, it's kind of like the four corners of the globe. You're drawing up to 7 cards on each of the cards laid down. And I would suggest you have the cards laid down face down first, because all of this is stuff that whoever you're reading on, whatever you're reading about, that person probably doesn't want you to see the thing. So you want, what's the strength they don't want me to see? What's the weakness they don't want me to see? What's the opportunity they don't want me to see? What's the threat they don't want me to see? And what's the thing they really don't want me to see in the middle? And then you can face up or down as your intuition goes. Up to 7 cards. You may stop at 1. You may stop at 3 with this is what I need to know about this. This is what I need to know about the protections. So do it however you want. You could spend hours and hours just doing a complete dossier, or you can just do something quick with okay, am I going to get eaten if I try this? Or, is there a secret tunnel in the astral I can slide through to, plant a fart bomb and run away? So, sorry, this is kind of where I'm at this afternoon. So take a look at that, use that, and then look at think about your spell that you've chosen and how it would interlock with that, especially with the different reactions. There's a lot of poetic and metaphorical thinking that goes into the science and the facts. And so this is part of what being magical and mystical is for, is you have that little bit of imagination, you have that little bit of storytelling to get to a greater truth. All right, so the next part is integrating that divination with the spell that you just put together to plan. And so first, with the knowledge you have now, review your motivation, intent, and impacts. So now that you see that what their motivators are, have yours changed? Usually for me, they don't change much, except I matter at you now, but things can change. If you understand that someone's like trying to do a good thing or trying to redirect something, that has come up. There's been a few times where I haven't gone at something because I realized that there was something they were doing in the background that was actually quite good. Or that I agreed was quite good, because again, this is all relative. Cleansing and protections. Do you need to add any protocols for extra protection? Do you need to work with a saint or a deity or an intercessor to get into contact with spirits that might stand in opposition or might not be there voluntarily? So that is the other part. And would cleansing the target at a remote impact the outcome of the spell? There have been a few times where I've just set a cleansing candle on someone whose impact was being very healthy for the unhealthy for my communities. And the cleansing candle actually brought them around and they went, oh, I was up in my head about something I misunderstood, or my pain was informing my actions or something. And so setting a cleansing candle on them, or I mean, it's expensive now, but I would just, set out an egg and a glass of water and write their name on it sometimes. Can't really do that anymore. um, but there are certain things where it might be, okay, the strategic thing to do is not what I thought. So do I need to do something to remove mental influence from this person? Is there spell breaking to get them out of a narrative they're trapped in? Is there a binding out of the egregor, so the egregor is just no longer controlling this specific person who can then get out and do the thing that they're being pulled to do? Or is the containment of something toxic needed? And I will tell you right now, you cannot mirror box an egregor. I've tried. Doesn't work. You cannot mirror box an animistic spirit. It's an animistic spirit. It is basically something that makes up the damn box, so it's not going to work. It is the box. Not going to work. So you have to be very selective about it. I know for a while between 2014 and 2020, people would say that a mirror box was like the ultimate magical thing you could do for a problem maker. And I've had so many people go, I did this and it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Well, it's because it's not the ultimate thing. Sometimes you have to look deeper or look more at what's around the person or at what that person can influence and what influences that person. And if you're just putting the person in the box, you're basically just isolating them with their influences. That's what makes that difficult. So before you do your spell, we already talked about this, just like before your divination. And yes, you do need to do it again. So working in ways to make these protocols efficient. But when you're designing your spell, you've got your basic spell designed. Now here's how you protect yourself and your spell and the work you do and anyone who is connected to you that may not have a say in how things play out. So setting up fail safes. So a lot of if this, then that. Okay, if this happens, if somebody tries to break the spell I'm working it, then this happens, so this stops them. Setting up specific spell triggers or warnings or alarm systems, setting up wards and traps, creating loops so someone thinks that they've broken the spell and then they didn't, and thinks that they've broken the spell and they didn't, and so it just turns into the same thing over and over where they think they're getting someplace different, but it keeps them busy so you can do your thing. You can install poisons. I know hemlock is an ally of my family, but I'm very selective about how I use it. Once you get to a certain point in animistic work, you generally don't need to physically include a poison ally. You can usually just ask it nicely and it'll say something like, give me some water or take a picture of me or tell me I'm pretty, and it's good, especially with plants. Where they understand and you've developed enough of a relationship that they don't want to hurt you. So they will add their energy in their way, and you don't necessarily have to have physical contact. This is part of allyship as opposed to dominionist magic or stewardship magic, where the animistic spirit, like the land, the water, whatever, is participating with you instead of you doing something for it or you do something to it or using it as an object. The other one is freezes. I'm hearing people's freezers are getting full, so I think we might need to do a questionnaire on, is a freezer spell really the right thing for this? Because I see a lot of things where the freezer spells, either it's your freezer's too full, that's working fine, but your freezer's too full, or it's the freezer just kind of froze them in a place where everybody's still suffering. The other one is basically putting someone on pause. And the easiest way to put someone's activities on pause, and no, you cannot do this with any citrus, because again, there are certain things protecting it that will F us all up. But on other strategic people that are not so protected, write the name down and everybody knows what the pause button is on their pause button is on play. If they use anything electronic, you just draw those two little lines, pause, Put it in the drawer underneath your stove, put it on your S list shelf, do whatever, but put them on pause. And then when you are ready for things to progress, then you can go ahead, burn that and go, okay, let's have this play out now that you're walking into a line of legislation that is not going to be something you're happy with. These are things you can do. Here's another thing is isolating where the trouble is coming from. In this case, isolating the specific human being that is promoting the burn baby burn ideas, such as if you are doing the divination and you are looking into board members and finding the names or finding the stories, uh, get the names, and maybe all you need is the names. You don't even need the photos, just like have the names out in front of you and look for, okay, who's the one who's promoting the environmental exploitation, if that's what you're focused on? Who is the one who decided it was a good idea to attack Black women in STEM? Who is the specific person that agitated for this? And yes, a lot of paths lead to Reddit, and I don't think that that is a healthy jungle to go into. Just get out of it there and look at it when it's corporate, when it's government, when it's cronyism, or if there is a spirit influencing the humans to do these awful things. So these are things that you can look for as you are tweaking and targeting that particular spell. And here's the other thing about the spell is now that you're tweaking and targeting it, how can you make it small enough scale that you can sustain it? And here's where I need to make a neurodivergent stop. And normally I have a card that literally says neurodivergent stop, but I was in a hurry today because Spirit called and I answered rather fast. Here's what I can say about that. For neurodivergent people, there is no one direct kind of neurodivergence. We know this. And neurodivergence and magic can be interesting because a lot of us that came from 90s influence witches were not being taught by people that recognized or respected neurodivergence or disability, even though a lot of us had it ourselves. A lot of us thought, I am just bad at this because I can't memorize this, or I am just bad at this because I can't sit to meditate. That is not true. It just means that there is a different method for you. The other part, and again, I say this because I live in an ADHD household, the other part that is tricky and difficult about this is for some of you, your brains need novelty, which means that you will need to have 3 to 5 iterations of the spell to hit the novelty button to keep wanting to do it, because spells are more effective when they're repeated. So it might be something you do once a week. I don't think every day is good, but I know that for some people, they will forget otherwise. But something once a week, twice a week, once a month, line it up with the moon phases. Do something that is easy and natural for you to do. And for those of you where part of the natural thing is to forget, to get distracted, to ignore your reminders, is find a way to build novelty in it, or just commit to, I can only do this for 3 weeks. Because usually I've noticed that the attention cycle for most, not all, people that are ADHD and on the autism spectrum that need the novelty is about 3 weeks. And then either they need it to be novel in a new way or they need to stop doing it. And you know what? 3 weeks of steady spell work, that's great. Even if it's 5 minutes a day, you showed up. That's what we need, is just a showing up. The decisions go to who shows up. That's a whole thing. And again, finding small sustainable things like a prayer practice, singing, chanting, things where you don't need tools or an altar at all, or it's a portable altar like a notebook altar. Those are ways that you can do these things and be able to continue to do them. So when you're looking at the trouble sources, here are some common spells to consider. And again, you can sing about a bind out. I like to do paper. I have a shelf in my house stuffed with my S list people. It's actually not stuffed. It's gotten a lot better since I moved to Kalamazoo, but you don't necessarily need that. You don't have to do this any one way. You just have to find the way that gets the results you want. And that's what all of the previous work was about, is finding a way to see your result and your outcome. So binding out, so you can bind people out of their own resources. I think it would be really entertaining to see a billionaire suddenly unable to access his accounts. I think that would be funny. Just unfortunately, we can't go for a specific billionaire, but there are other billionaires that are also behaving poorly that do not have those protections. You can bind someone out of the corporate egregor, which can be a mental health saver for some people. You might want to try that yourself if you work for a major corporation, just as a mental health saver, and to see how it feels. You can bind them out of small, meaningful pleasures and find out what those are through divination, so you know really how to target it. You can take their energy and just redirect it again. This is what I like Jasper for, singing songs, working with runes. There's a lot of things that might speak to you and your specific traditions or practices where that redirection would work. And I don't know anything specific about most of them. Because I'm a city priest, I kind of have to stay out of traditions because if I'm in a box, I can't see what I need to see. You can do strategic hot footing. So again, the thing where, all right, Dave is the problem right now, but for things to fall apart completely with the whole org, we need to actually get rid of Larry. So you hot foot Larry and then make a problem for Dave before he's been able to replace Larry. Strategic hot footing, looking for exactly where to do it so he moves on. I would suggest if you're going to do that, and yes, you can do hot footing remotely, but it is tricky. And actually, that would probably be best for dream space. But again, you need to ward yourself with that because there's a lot of stuff that goes on there. I mean, yeah. So that one, you need to give Larry a specific idea of, wouldn't it feel good to go to like someplace where Larry's energy is healthy or where his presence is healthy or where he'll have some big moment, self-realization moment and just, stop supporting evil things. There's things we subvert the influence. This is also subverting influence is also called malicious compliance. And this is one of my favorite things to do because mischief and anger are what fuel me. And so what you can do is say, okay, they're trying to get this kind of control over the population. So adding energy in a specific and chaotic way to make them really regret it as fast as possible. You really do need to look at your outcomes, potential outcomes and impacts with that. But if you can do it just right, so that only the people that deserve the suffering get it can be really fun to watch. Doing spell breaking. One, there's a couple different levels in this. One is there are some people that have basically just joined a cult. They're really desperate to do right. They're confused about what is right. And it's easy to just step in because it feels good to have that familiarity. It feels protected. It feels powerful. But it also influences their minds about not thinking critically, and spell breaking is important for that. The other part is just a routine spell breaking at the most inconvenient moment for things that are protecting some of the horrors that we're living out. Spirit persuasion, it is possible. Some spirits have contracts that they will allow to be bought out. This is a little bit more advanced and should be something I teach another workshop on at another time. I only have one of me and only so much energy, so I'm doing what I can. I need to see everything in this class through before I can go to that. But it is something, especially with animistic agreements, a lot of the times, if you can persuade the animistic spirit to see a little shorter term, do not let it share how it sees time with you. It will kill you. Do not. But if you can persuade it to say, okay, I understand, I am this tiny little squishy thing that is very temporary to you. And I know we are all being very annoying to you, and eventually you're going to kick us all off. And, they can be screaming, drill, baby, drill, and it's not a you problem because it's us that's going to be gone. But you might enjoy my company. So can we talk about that and how we can have it longer? These are some of the conversations you end up having. There's also just picking at the little things in their day-to-day lives. So for those of us that are Gen Xers, there was this kid's book that I highly recommend getting as an adult called Alexander and the No Good, Terrible, Very Bad Day. I would say use that as your inspiration if you decide to narrow in and just make it that personal. But remember, if you are going to narrow in and make it that personal, you need to have an end game. You need to have a point. This is not just being petty to be petty or make someone's life suck. This is for a greater cause for your community. So don't do the petty stuff because unless you know that doing the petty stuff is going to result in a larger benefit to you and your communities. So reconnaissance and refinement, and I've talked a little bit about this already, is isolating your troublemakers and how to narrow it down. So this is cyber stalking for the greater good. I like to cyber stalk through my library and not through Facebook and LinkedIn. So looking onto business databases, how LLCs got incorporated, digging past the Delaware Corporation. I am a former journalist. This is a thing I do. Sourcing news articles, Googling them in the Google News section brings stuff up pretty quickly. And there are places to check on corporate and nonprofit websites. Usually So on a corporate website, the way you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty of who's who is a lot of them will have something that's like an investor's link that's way down at the bottom in tiny print. That's where you need to click. So the investor's link is who the corporate board members are, what their prospectus looked like in the last year, what stock exchanges they're on, basically all of the tools that they want wealthy people who want to buy partial ownership into the company or to make major donations. This is where those people go to get involved and gain some aspect of control. So this is where you find the names to names, sometimes the pictures, not as much since United Healthcare, but they are there. And that is where you find them. And most people don't even look to think that. That's usually, oh, it's not the contact or customer service. They don't think about it. I'm a former journalist, so of course I go, ooh, I'll bet you there's stuff that they don't want me to know there, but they want wealthy people to know, so I go there. Public library databases and librarians will gladly help you with this, especially these days. So libraries are allies. We need to protect them. So if you're, again, you may be feeling called, we will talk about narrowing down which cause to go at. The tricky parts of companies, and this is something that I'm dealing with Google, and I mentioned earlier that the corporate egregore has been trying to talk to me because it's turning into something it doesn't want, is Google's employees don't work for Google, they work for Alphabet, which is a completely different company with a completely different egregore. This is something to watch for if you're doing these readings and looking for ways to target your magic. And so we've already talked about finding the specific board members, but these are just things to look out for as you're refining and deciding how and where to aim. So I have a chart in the PowerPoint for those that are looking at it. And so this is kind of a hierarchy, but like the individual member of the board is actually at the bottom of it. There's conscripted spirits, there's the board, and this is kind of aligned in level of power and authority and hardened. And these are the ones top to bottom that are the hardest to get around. And they all have certain difficulties and certain protections that you will need to watch out for. Just remember, just because somebody doesn't think of it as magical or isn't magical doesn't mean they don't have power, and it doesn't mean they don't have magic. And do not assume because someone is Christian that they do not practice magic. They may not call it the same things we do unless they're a Christian witch, but it is there. Make no assumptions about anybody's power or lack thereof, especially your own. So there are particular sources of issues, especially on government levels. One is lobbyists. I think that magical people need to start looking a lot closer at lobbyists for the insurance industry, the petroleum industry, things that have kept us from having renewable resources. Think tanks are where they come up with the bright ideas like American Heritage Foundation and Project 2025. That was a think tank project, and here we freaking are. Investors and board members. Now, here's a tricky part in investors is you need to frame it very carefully because a lot of people have 401ks, which makes them investors in these companies. 401k is kind of a scam to hold up the economy. My spouse can tell you more about that because they will rant about it. But basically, most people's 401ks makes them investors in some of these companies that are working against everyone. So a little bit of their retirement goes in that, props up these companies that basically mushroom and mushroom and mushroom, and then decide to exploit somebody else. And so you can't just say, I want to curse all the investors. You might be cursing yourself. So you need to be very specific, targeted, and go to the actual decision makers and not just to Joe random investor who's just trying to make sure he can buy shoes when he retires. So that's something else. So I want to come back to this. Hexing is good. Sometimes a hex is very satisfying. Sometimes a blessing can be better, but humbling is always better than hexing because humbling actually gets the person humble. Here's the thing about humility. Humility is not aw shucks. Humility is not modesty. Humility is knowing exactly where you really stand in the world. So when you do something like humble someone, and I have done things where someone was bullying a family member, so I wrote humble so-and-so's name on a bay leaf and burned it, and there were interesting things that happened. And that person's behavior has changed because that person was confronted with not only their resources and what was available to them, but also how they've been impacting people around them. Humbling is always better than hexing. So there's a time and a place for doing worse. There's a time and a place for bringing more anger. But often we talk all the time about trying to curse people with self-awareness. Well, you don't need to curse them. You need to humble them. You need to make them aware of their actual place in the world and what that really actually means. So let's talk about some overlooked allies, because a lot of us practice specific traditions where we will talk about land and water, and this is where urban magic comes back in again. Is there are other sources of help. It's just a matter of us getting a little bit further out of the box, or recognizing that the worst things can say is if you ask politely with respect and offering, the worst you're going to get usually is just a no, not a violent reaction. And no is not a horrible thing to hear. So the first is the mighty dead. I talk a lot about working with ancestors and ancestor work. That's a thing. But the mighty dead, we're talking about, I think at this point, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has had enough rest that we could potentially make an altar to her and say, I think you have something to say about this. And would you like to know some influences you're able to make now? A lot of the best ways for working with the mighty dead is very worked into Catholic saints worship. They kind of have a formula for it in some ways. There are other ways to do it, but it is a good place to look to for inspiration as you're developing your own practices, or look to if that is part of your ancestry and upbringing. Because remember, folk saints worship is not the same thing necessarily as Catholicism as we know it. And I wasn't raised Catholic, but my father was Catholic. I ended up coming into relationship with spirits I came to know as saints when I lived in San Francisco, because that was part of working with the whole community of spirits. And they are way less judgmental than you would expect most of the time. Sometimes a little angrier, which is why we got along, but just because they're saints doesn't mean they're Catholic anymore. It depends on the individual saint. So if you go that way, but you can also approach other mighty dead that are not part of that. W.E.B. Du Bois was the founder of the NAACP. Sojourner Truth is going to have a lot of things to say about how Black women are treated, because that's the thing in my mind. Harvey Milk was the first gay man to get public office in the United States, and he's one of the San Francisco mighty dead that I would go to for guidance as a city priest, even now that I'm living in a different city, because I am queer. This is my community. This is a concern I have. The one that I think that we really need to be talking to right now is Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was the Supreme Court justice that ended segregation. And there's a lot of trying to reinstill that again. So bringing back Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, give them a chance to talk to each other. These are some energies that we could work with, that we could bring in, that we could ask for guidance from while we are trying to restore equal accountability, or bring about equal accountability. So the other part, again, is a lot of the stuff going on now comes from either accelerationism, which is basically burn it all down so Jesus gets here faster. They are not thinking about what Jesus was actually like, at least as far as we know. Because I don't think that any Jesus of Nazareth that's going to get dragged back to this is going to be amused to see the whole world burn down. Look what I did, dumbass. So there's that. But there's also the land, the waters, the trees participate with us. They are our neighbors. They are not objects. They are not things we rule over. Yes, we happen to build on them, but it's really, they're just tolerating us until they don't. I have watched enough sinkholes happen in earthquake zones to know that the land just tolerates us until it's done. And I have noticed the number of very expensive SUVs that end up in sinkholes is disproportionately high for it to be coincidence. So bringing them in, showing them the respective conversation with them, saying, hey, are you tired of us digging into you this way? Here's what we need to survive. Can we talk about some different ways to do this? And can you work with us to get them off you, since this is not okay? Without projecting, because again, animistic spirits do not experience things or communicate the way humans do. This is not anthropomorphization. So learning how to receive those messages and learning how to make yourself understood can be a tricky process, but at least inviting them to have their say, or inviting the ancestors of the first peoples around you, whatever those first peoples were, who can translate because they did have those relationships first. This is all working with your whole community, acknowledging all of your neighbors. This is not isolating into just the queer community. This is not isolating into just the pagan community. There are humans and non-human persons and physical human neighbors who are impacted by this stuff too. How can I invite them into this process? So again, it's strengthening by building community, having community energy. So even the small actions have more power, have more firepower behind them, have more horsepower behind them. It's not straining you as much, and the community is not strained as that harmony starts to build and continue. Strategic justice groups. Okay, wait, I almost skipped one. So the other part, and actually I don't want to skip this one. A lot of people talk about Lady Columbia, Lady Liberty as the goddess of justice that is incorporated into her system. And if you look at a lot of US government buildings, there was a lot of Greek and Roman energy and pantheons invoked. I think we're overlooking something huge in that, and I will be honest, I've never quite felt the resonance or power I should from Lady Columbia. I'm not sure why that is. That might be something to look at later, but right now I'm worried about just surviving. The Constitution of the United States was designed from its inception to be an egregor of the US American people. It is actually, when we talk about it being a living document, because we still use it, we still refer to it, it is I believe at one point it was the oldest living legal document in the world. I could be wrong about that, so I need to fact check. But it is also, again, because this is magic, the metaphors translate into the astral. It is alive, it is aware, and it wants to continue to exist. When we are doing this work, we can invoke the spirit of the Constitution and the spirit of the Bill of Rights into the work. Now, I had a little conversation with that energy, and what I've been asked to relay in this class is this. It will do this for anyone who reads it from the beginning to the end. That is the price of getting its contribution to your magic, is it needs you to read it from beginning to end. It's not going to test you. It just needs to actually be read. And that's what it wants in order to bring its energies into the magic you're trying to do. So that's what I got to pass on today, which is fun because usually I have to pass on winter phase yelling at people about their urban too. So the Washington, D.C. city spirit can be an ally or an enemy. It is asking for a cleansing. This is not something one single person should do, but something where occasionally you give it a little something or a seed of something will help. State capitol buildings have awareness. Buildings have awareness. They have their own spirits. I actually have a small TikTok and Instagram series from last summer where I was working with a student of mine on getting in communication and working with a government building. County seats, general government buildings, general corporation buildings, which are a little trickier because they usually have added protections. These are things that can work with or against you, or can be helpful tools of delivery. So, for example, when I was doing a urban magic demonstration in New York City, I brought some apples, big apple, and I wanted to seed something that was more equitable than what was going on at the time. And this was in 2021. And so someone took the seeds and planted them by the Trump building. And my understanding is there are some chaotic things happening there now that are very, very funny. And it's definitely reduced the value of that building. I don't know if it's helped the neighborhood much, but that's what the person who was doing it wanted to take and go do with that energy. So I'm coming towards the end here. There were a few things I got told to add at the last minute. And I thank you so much for all sticking with me and spending the time on this. The next part is strategic justice with groups. So obviously I work as a solo practitioner and a family practitioner. I used to do covens. I am too much of a troublemaker for covens, let's be honest. But I am aware I do work with groups. I do organize groups, and I am very good at group dynamic execution. So here's the advice I have to give. If you decide that you want to have your coven or your organization do this work, and that is learn how to delegate. Again, Magick doesn't multitask, but if you see a whole bunch of spells that'll work on something and you've got a group of people willing to do it, going, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, that will help. The other part is learning to prioritize. So one of my favorite tools that I think is wildly undervalued for some reason is the Eisenhower matrix, also known as the priority matrix. And this is the one where you figure out what's most important and what's not important right now, and decide to divide up what you need to do based on that and based on the energy levels you have. So, for example, important, urgent, judge needs to intervene right now on some federal funding bans. Someone right now needs to distract an ICE agent. Not important, your exosaucy text. You get the idea. This is where the energy needs to go right now. And this is a really good tool. And this is one of the things I use daily to help me fight off overwhelm, is by reminding myself, okay, here's the energy I have. Here's the things in front of me. Here's what I have energy for today. And because I am a spoonie, this is something I have to take into account when I do this work. The other parts that we need to talk about, because a lot of it is progressive, groups have been getting torn apart. Now, some of this is magical influence and some of this is cultural things that have gotten in our heads that are just not healthy. So one, purity culture is actually toxic. So there's a lot of people who are destroying compassion-based human decency movements because someone didn't do this one particular thing good enough, or, oh, we made this progress, but now I'm going to point out all the things wrong with it, who got overlooked, who got left out. And it's the expectation, it's just constantly raising the bar instead of going, hey, this is good. It's the politics of not good enough, and it is extremely destructive and needs to stop. I'm not saying don't improve. I'm saying stop with that fake analysis bullshit. It is destructive. I already saw the fat positive movement basically get torn apart, not because of anything that a doctor did wrong, but because the doctor happened to not be Black. And that wasn't okay either. And in fact, it destroyed something that was saving lives. So what the F? Give each other grace. Nobody has a perfect day. People put their foot in their mouths. Give each other a chance. Don't just do the sudden, oh no, I'm going to cut you off. There's a high people get from canceling people, and it's making them less discriminatory about who needs to be canceled and why. Neil Gaiman, absolutely yes, deserves it. There are certain other people, not so much. So keep that in mind. And again, some of this comes down to trust but verify. I've noticed that there has been like truth and findings that have come out about from some people that were attacked unfairly, and nobody really seems to want to take accountability for that. We are trying to create a society where everything is equally accountable, where everyone is equally accountable. We're not if we're doing that shit. I understand because I live with it, and I live with neurodivergence, that absolutism, there's this idea that these are the rules and people should follow them. And there's kind of this breaking point because people don't always follow them, or they think that the rules are for other people and not them. And reflect and understand that very few things are absolute and healthy. I don't think I've found anything where their absolutism is always healthy. Emotional labor matters, and it belongs in self-care and after practices. So you do need time to process your emotions. You do need time to understand why you feel the way you feel about certain things. Absolutely, 100%. And make sure that there is a time and a place for it, because one, functioning adults, we don't have the right to just expect a stranger to carry it for us. And there's a lot of that in the world right now. But the other part is it exhausts you. It takes nourishment. So if you have a day where you're just wiped out by the feels, of course you're tired. Of course you need rest. And sometimes after spell work, there are intense and emotional reactions that can happen. And that usually means there's processing that needs to be done, because either there was some part of your motivation that didn't get acknowledged, or it was totally about the motivation and you had to feel things you've been avoiding to make the thing happen, which means congratulations on the breakthrough, but ow. or it is something where you are getting a prognostication because you came up against something that you need to get some rest and go back and look and revise what you did. So those emotional abreactions are important. Learn the difference between being offended versus being harmed. I think most people on the progressive side do a slightly better job of that, but not always. And it is perfectly fine to be offended, but not being allowed to exist falls into harm. That is the distinction. The other part is when you're bringing up these criticisms, you're bringing up these insights, are you doing it because you want to see things improve and you have a specific improvement you want to put forward? Or are you just looking for an audience to see how insightful you are? I went through a phase like that in my teens. I've outgrown it. I've seen a lot of younger people on social media do it just for the audience, and it harms. And always, always start when you're looking at a trust issue. What is most important here? Always reset on what is most important, even if it requires you writing an motivation, intent, and impact statement to stay centered on what's most important. The next part is shared vision. And this is the tricky part because I've already talked about how what peace looks like to one person may not look the same to another person. Magick, again, doesn't multitask. And so it's best to keep it to one effort, one cause, one specific micro issue at a time, and trust that there's other people that are going to prioritize their passions so that it's not on you to cover everything. It's not on you to save the world. It's on you to just save this part of the fence, to cut off the snake's head and throw it out in the yard, the one thing. And for people that share your passions, talk to them about what the end game looks like to them. What does peace look like to you? What's our end game here? What's the vision? Where do we want to end up? What do we want to build? What do we want to manifest from this work? And what does your long-term end game look like for yourself? Are you living in a house with a loved one? Are you up in the trees saying, I am done with the world of men. I'm just going to sell herbs for my treehouse? This is something that some Polish women may have done at some point in history. Does not sound bad, except I like running water and electricity. But look at that. And can you break down the individual spells per person in your group after you've got that shared vision? So you can do layered work towards the end goal without wearing anybody out. Or do you want to do one single spell where there's a lot of power towards one specific thing? So if anybody happens to wonder, I did list what my vision is because some people may wonder that and wonder where I'm at, especially since I can seem like an agent of chaos when I'm, yeah, I guess I kind of am, but not always. I actually want some peace, but this year is the year of chaos, whether I like it or not. My vision, people should exist without fear of death from other people, just for being who they are. People should not be attacked for existing. People should not be coerced into slavery. Emotional and physical violence needs denormalization. We need to recognize that emotional violence is still violence. People should have housing, healthcare, and enough to eat, and it is a human right. It should not be something you earn. People should practice the faith that calls them and not practice it on others against their will. One of my big issues with a lot of supposedly religious people is they're up in my business about how I am. And I'm going, so how are you practicing this on yourself? They never have an answer for that. If people don't have faith, leave them be. People have a right to not believe. If that's how they are wired, that's how they are wired. People's bodies should be sovereign. So whatever changes someone wants to make, whatever passes through that person's body and enters this world, whatever doesn't, that is sovereign to that person. If there are specific relationship agreements about that, that is in that relationship and should not be a matter of law. It should not be of religion, and it should not be a matter of external authority. People should be able to access information meaningful to them with or without investment. Now, I'm a writer. I like it when people buy my books. But this is why I also support libraries, is people should be able to access the information they need. Corporations should not rule people's lives. And right now they very much do. And I think that's a problem. Now, here's the thing. That's a pretty big vision. That's a pretty big list of things I want. So if you look on the PowerPoint, remember what I said is you can only pick one thing to focus on. And because I'm Diana, I have two. There's a strike through. Where am I putting my efforts? One, emotional and physical violence needs denormalization. That is the most important thing to me right now. We're not going to get any of this other stuff until we start addressing the constant culture of abuse we're in. And corporations should not rule people's lives. Well, for me, I'm seeing this as kind of a 2-in-1, especially as I'm going after a nonprofit that's doing some horrible things. So with this, I have a list of spells to cast. And again, these are spells that I've been meaning to create. So I probably will be posting them a little bit at a time on my Patreon. But if other people decide to use this and create them, awesome. Whether they share them or not, up to them. These are some spells for community good that I will be making my own versions of, and you may make your own versions of, because everybody works differently, has different allies, different sets. More is better with this stuff. So, spell breakers, to snap people out of propaganda influences, to take down spells holding the status quo in place. That one has to be used with careful judgment. To break a narrative, that's a hard one. That's actually going to involve the muses. To shatter influence, possibly shatter influential culture, that one's going to take some extra strategy. To free from learned helplessness, that one's an especially hard one, because that requires a second spell of instilling courage, strength, and a sense of sovereignty. Like, you can't just do that one by itself. Spells for community good, things to resurrect a sense of self, resurrect a sense of community. This is great neighborhood magic to do, encouraging storytelling, encouraging remember those who lived before, encouraging those you would like to see living near you. Redistribution of power, discovering hidden rights. A lot of us don't know our full rights in a lot of situations in the US. Discover hidden resources and hiding the vulnerable. That is something I'm an expert at. So, also spells to cast, turning slander and truth on the slanderous. So having them basically match up as an unholy pair of lies and truths to make a big mess of confusion for them. Equality rising spells. So just the idea, and by this I mean equal accountability, and to bring the abusive into equality, which means that the accountability happens. So here's what I'm hoping you got out of this. Thank you so much for sticking with me on this. And I'm hoping those of you that watch the recording later really enjoy this, really get a lot out of this. And again, feel free to ask questions or to share experiences that you've had with this kind of work already. It's all really valuable, and this is the time that we all really need it. So yeah, I want you to know, yeah, you can fight back. And the little things make a bigger difference than you can possibly imagine, because most of the stuff going on is to get us into freeze. So fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. Most of this is to get us so overwhelmed that we're frozen. Small spells repeated over time can take down big chunks of opposition. And I understand that some of you will be able to repeat this over longer time periods of time than others. Now, I want you to understand, and I didn't say this specifically up front, most of what I'm teaching here is guerrilla magic. You look for the little things. You look for the little things. You climb up in the trees and get a view above. And you don't necessarily do the, I'm going to go straight at you. You do the, I'm going to go around the corners and look in the shadows and see the circumstances that I can go at you with. And in fact, I learned this partly from my Polish ancestors who did teach this to some people in the Revolutionary War, but also from people that have attacked me because of their tactics. I am taking what was done to me and turning it to good. And remember, hexing is good, but humbling is better. So from there, I want to thank everyone for coming. If you'd like to subscribe to my Substack, please do. I usually set out something that is half free information, and then there's like paywalled spells or rituals or, more of the rest of the story type stuff. And most of my Substack, my Patreon, I'm building slowly. I'm working on a magical modalities for psychic perceptions project on my website. And I do take tarot bookings. So for people that think they're cursed, I do a screening. Usually they're not, but at least I will listen enough to respect and look and say, hey, is there something going on here? And we usually do find something going on. It's usually just not a curse. But I do readings, divinations, ancestor work and contacts, and reincarnation exploration, frequently when it intersects with ancestor work. Again, One of the best things you can do for me and my family is buy my books. I am the author of Hex Twisting, Counter Magic Spells for the Irritated Witch, Urban Magic, A Guide for the City Witch, and the Samhain and Maven installments of this Llewellyn Sabbath Essential series. And a long time ago, I wrote a book on paganism and divorce that definitely needs an update. So there are places you can find me. They're all there. As far as this video goes, it's going to auto load up to YouTube. There will be a Substack email sent out later. For people that prefer to own the content they watch, I am going to make the video available on dianarachel.com and on Golden Apple Metaphysical. So you have a place where you can download it for your personal use without having to worry about a platform disappearing it or me taking it down for whatever reason. So for people that were looking in the PowerPoint, my image sources were all public domain or just part of Microsoft Word. And yes, we have our little void scream demon in there with us. So he just wants us to feel better, so he'll do the void screaming for us, and we can go do our work. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for taking the time. I hope you get a lot valuable out of this workshop, and I am hoping that this leads to me building some really cool stuff that we can use as things go on. And so I'm not sure if this lets me see any questions. I guess it doesn't. So if there are folks who would like to ask me questions, if you go into the Spirited Witch chat, that is part of my Substack, that unless Substack changed it, sometimes stuff gets reset. You should be able to go into the chat connected to my Substack, and we can have a relatively live, somewhat delayed conversation there. So I'm trying to think if there might be a better place for it, but I kind of don't want to go to the other places where it would be the easiest to do. So that's what I have, and thank you so much for taking the time. Stay magical, curious spirits.